Support for Trifles comes from listeners like you, who support us through Patreon and Substack. Bonus material, thank you gifts, and more await at patreon.com/trifles and at trifles.substack.com. And now you can enjoy some Trifles swag, mugs, notepads, and oval stickers, available in our store. Find it at ihearofsherlock.com/merchandise.
Welcome to Trifles, a weekly podcast about the Sherlock Holmes stories.
It is, of course, a trifle, but there is nothing so important as trifles.
Yes, the colorman was retired, the three-quarter was missing, and the client was illustrious, but there are so many other details to pick apart in the stories.
Pray, be precise as to details.
You know the plots, but what about the minutiae? Have you ever wondered why Sherlock Holmes had 3 different colored dressing gowns? Or what a Crockford is?
You are very inquisitive, Mr. Holmes.
It is my business to know what other people don't know.
Scott Monty and Burt Wolder will have the answers to these questions and more in Trifles.
The game's afoot.
Episode 470, The Chronology of the Apocrypha. Well, hello there, and welcome to the final episode of Trifles for Season 9. This is the podcast where we get into the details and the minutiae of the Sherlock Holmes stories. I'm Scott Monty.
I'm Burt Wolder.
And Burt, it's about time.
It certainly is about time. And hold on a minute, let me check my watch. Oh, I've got a car coming to pick me up. I got to go. Have a great day.
Dang it. I knew it was about that time.
Yeah.
We're saved, folks.
Get back.
Thanks to your generous contributions, this episode will be Wolder-free.
Yes. And if you pay more, you'll never have to listen to me again. Oh, I hear those checks coming in. The sound of the cash register is ringing.
No. People pay because they want to hear you.
Those
and
fools.
We'll tell people how to do that. But just a brief summary here. This episode, this kind of came about by happenstance. As you know, we've done an entire series this season on the Apocrypha of Sherlock Holmes. 9 episodes in which we have gone through the various stories that are related to Sherlock Holmes, perhaps should have appeared in the canon but didn't, and are kind of added on, whether they happen to be authentic or extensive or short or whatever. And we hope you've been enjoying that. And by the way, if you are a subscriber on Substack or Patreon, you can actually get all of those episodes grouped by that particular theme. They're in collections in Patreon, and I think they're a topic in Substack. But we'll have a link to those in the show notes so you can check out the entire series. But when it comes to this particular episode, this happened, as I said, a bit of a happenstance. Burt and I are both members of the Chronologist Guild, Sherlockians that enjoy either participating in putting the Sherlockian stories in chronological order or reading about those who do the same. And by the way, you can listen to episode 144 of I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, where we talk to Vincent Wright about the chronologies of Sherlock Holmes. And then more recently, we talked with Brad Kefauver in episode 309 about Holmes in an hour or two, where you can kind of do your own chronology. And episode 320 with Bruce Harris, where we talked about It Is Not Always 1895. So as part of that, the September issue of the Chronologist Guild newsletter, Timeline, had an article that talked about dating the Apocrypha. And we thought, well, this is interesting because it kind of brings together this whole idea of chronology and the Apocrypha series that we did. And we thought it would be interesting to explore today. So, you got your seatbelt on for that, Bert?
I've got my airbags are deployed.
Perfect. Hopefully it'll be a low-impact show.
I hope so.
Well, you could make an impact here, folks, by helping us out on Patreon or Substack. If you subscribe on either one of those services, either monthly or annually, you contribute to our success. You make it possible for us to keep going, whether it's the research that we do, the prizes that we give away at the end of every month, which, that's this episode. Stay tuned at the end of the show for that. Or simply helping us to fund, the mechanics of what it takes to host a podcast, hosting fees, website, etc. So we thank you for that in advance. For as little as $1 a month over on Patreon, you can get access to all of our archives, ad-free, and bonus material. We do extra content every now and then to thank our special supporters and listeners. And you can be part of that. So just check us out at patreon.com/trifles or trifles.substack.com. Okay, well, I threatened people with this episode. It's from an article in Timeline. What is it? Who wrote it? And what are we up to, Bert?
Well, that's a very good question. What it is dating the Apocrypha. Now, not anything, depending on your definition of Apocrypha. This could be quite extensive, but for the purposes of this essay, we are talking about 4 stories. We're talking about 2 round-the-fire stories that were published by Arthur Conan Doyle, in which a celebrity reasoner known for investigating crimes writes into a newspaper to propose a solution to an unsolved crime. And those 2 stories are, first, The Man with the Watches and The Lost Special. And then there are 2 sort of comic stories that depict Holmes and Watson having conversations, sometimes around breakfast. And one of these is The Field Bazaar, and the second one is How Watson Learned the Trick. And so Brett Graham Fawcett has written this essay, Why? What a good question. Why and how we should date the Apocrypha of these particular stories.
Perfect.
And the why, I suppose, is a good place to start. So why do we why?
It's a good question. Why any chronology exists is one for the ages. But I think it's in parallel with the Sherlockian mind, or the mind of Sherlock Holmes, I should say, that looks to create order out of chaos. And when we are presented with, in total, 60 canonical stories, and then another, well, in this case, they're looking at 4 ex-canonical stories, apocryphal stories, we like to try and fit those pieces of the puzzle together to figure out where in Holmes's career, where in the Holmes-Watson relationship these cases may have occurred, because that tells us a little bit about their mentality at the time, perhaps their home life and habits, other career milestones, etc. And it just helps us put ourselves in the time and place of Sherlock Holmes.
Well, yeah, that's a very good answer. And the other part of that, I think, that goes very closely with that is that if you think about these particular 4 cases, which, of course, specifically have Holmes and Watson in them, which is one of the reasons why it's a good thing to be doing, when you look at the times in which they appeared and the events in which they described, sometimes, in some cases, you look at them and you say, well, wait a minute now. This doesn't agree. Doesn't agree with where we know Holmes was at a particular time. And by going through this exercise, you can happily resolve most of these frictions. So that's another good reason.
Yeah. So Brett Graham Fawcett writes that he's not going to debate whether these are apocryphal, but he says that finding dates for when they have had to have occurred, if they did occur, is a necessary part of this debate. For example, he said previously he wrote about how despite claiming that its central puzzle occurred on March 18th, 1892, the Lost Special must actually depict an event that occurred on March 8th, 1891, the day before the Great Blizzard of London. And that means that the apparent problem of why Sherlock Holmes would be writing into the Daily Gazette during the Great Hiatus in 1892, of course, where he's gone from 1891 to 1894, that becomes, that evaporates, since that crime occurred 2 months before that final confrontation with Moriarty on the Reichenbach Falls. But he said this does not prove that the mentioned well-known criminal investigator in the Lost Special is Sherlock Holmes, but it does remove an impediment to this case, to this being the case, and shows how chronological research can make the debate over its canonicity more fruitful.
Yeah, now, I mean, just for, a quick jog of the memory of our listeners, the story of the Lost Special was published in the Strand magazine in August of 1898, and it's a story about the mysterious disappearance of an entire train, a special train. And, we've talked about that, and Holmes supposedly features into it because, as you just said, a noted private investigator has written in with a proposed solution to the newspaper, and people like to assume, they say to themselves, well, that sounds a lot like Sherlock Holmes. So the Lost Special purports to have taken place on June 3rd of 1890, and unless... Now, wait a minute. Now, that's the Lost Special. So we were just...
Yeah, we were just talking about the Lost Special. That's right.
Yeah, we were just talking about that. So that's all been taken care of. Now, the next one is the Field Bazaar. And the Field Bazaar is really interesting. It was published in a November 20, 1896 issue of The Student, which was a newspaper at Edinburgh University. And it advertised a bazaar that was being held to raise money, basically, for the construction of a new cricket field. And the story is about Watson being contacted by the university, who's asked him to contribute something for the fundraiser. And the nice part about all this is that Holmes infers all of this through observation and deduction, including the fact that Watson is going to write up the whole conversation that they're having when they're done. And the date of that story, since it was published in November of 1896, seems, relatively clear. But the question that our author here asks is, well, wait a minute, is that canonical? Well, we learn a lot in the Field Bazaar. We learn Watson is an alumni of the University of Edinburgh, which would explain, by the way, how he knew Arthur Conan Doyle and the literary agent, but that he only holds a Bachelor of Medicine degree, not an MD, and thus can only be called Dr. Watson out of courtesy. And this happens to contradict the first sentence of A Study in Scarlet, which opens by saying that Watson graduated as a Doctor of Medicine from the University of London in 1878. So there's a problem.
Oh.
Well, now, though he didn't commit himself to whether or not the Field Bazaar was really canonical, Bill Baring Gould, in his work actually accepted this detail as sort of a fact. And, Baring Gould, noted that Holmes called Watson a general practitioner with very limited experience and mediocre qualifications. But, I mean, I don't know, holding a Bachelor's of Medicine doesn't seem to me to be mediocre qualifications. But anyway, Conan Doyle himself had completed a Bachelor of Medicine and a Master of Surgery at the University of Edinburgh, which was offering them as a combined degree in 1881, and he set up his practice in Southsea in 1882 and only completed his MD in 1885. And so, that tells us that if Watson really did have this Bachelor of Medicine degree from Edinburgh, he would have had surgical training in the process, and he would have been able to do the surgical work we know he went on to do. So, where all that leaves us is that if the Field Bazaar occurred, it occurred in November of 1896. Now, of course, the problem with that is that, as our authors just told us, the Field Bazaar was published in a November 20, 1896 of the Edinburgh University paper, The Student. So, deciding that the conversation that was reported occurred in November of 1896.
Yeah, that very same month.
Give not very much time to, there's no reason why it couldn't have happened earlier, but there you are.
Well, fresh off the Baker Street conversation, I guess. So let's turn to how Watson learned the trick. Now, if you recall, this was the miniature book that Conan Doyle produced for the Queen Mary's Dollhouse, which is probably the oddest provenance of any Holmes story of any description. But here we have Holmes and Watson enjoying breakfast together. Watson tries to make a deduction in Holmesian style, and Holmes, of course, does his usual, where he debunks Watson's conclusions and saying that he put on his coat because he was headed to the dentist. And the letter that he received was confirming his appointment, and the cricket page was beside the financial one. And if I turned to it to find if Surrey, was holding its own against Kent, which seems a little odd for Holmes to be following cricket, but that's aside. And now, cricket season is summertime, so that helps us in this chronological journey. And here, Fawcett turns to the Sherlock Holmes reference library, edited by Les Klinger. And there's a note there that says, Holmes states that his knowledge of cricket clubs is small. It seems clear, then, that the events here recounted occurred after 1896, when the conversation recorded in the Field Bazaar almost certainly occurred. And this predates Holmes's retirement, which was in 1903, and it puts Watson and Holmes together at Baker Street, which means it occurred before Watson's second marriage, which is traditionally agreed to as happening in 1902. And here we turn to Ross Davies, who has an essay about when Watson learned the trick. And he says that this conversation occurred on June 4th, 1902. And here we have Fawcett challenging Klinger's argument. He said, yes, Holmes had a small experience of cricket clubs, but he says that his skills are superficial. These deduction skills, and he sometimes is given to half-ironic modesty. Well, let's suppose that small experience of cricket clubs is enough for him to know that cricket clubs incur a lot of debt. And that seems to demand more than a passing acquaintance with the institutions. And I like this reference in the paragraph, Bert. It says, further, as the hosts of I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere note, Holmes may not care for cricket clubs, but may still follow professional cricket. Can't argue with that, right?
Well, no, sure. I mean, Holmes is, interested in the news and what's going on. And also, cricket is such a great part of life that it's, simply possible that he played cricket and was familiar with it, but it just wasn't a major overriding interest, as were so many other things in the life of Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah. And that's why Fawcett says that he doesn't think that how Watson learned the trick or the field bazaar are based on this alleged new interest in cricket that Holmes supposedly developed in between the cases. Instead, he says, let's focus on Holmes mentioning that he needs to visit the dentist. This is the only reference, he says, that he's aware where Holmes' record of criminals includes an entry on someone named Matthews, who knocked out my left canine in the waiting room at Charing Cross. That's in The Empty House. Okay, that occurred, of course, before the Great Hiatus, and therefore before 1891. So, if how Watson learned the trick occurred prior to 1890, what occurred before it? And he draws our attention to this moment in the conversation, where Watson says, I was thinking how superficial are these tricks of yours and how wonderful it is that the public should continue to show interest in them. I quite agree, said Holmes. In fact, I have a recollection that I have myself made a similar remark. So the question is, which similar remark is Holmes referring to? And Fawcett suggests that he's using the opening exchange in the Copper Beeches, when Holmes is a little on edge about Watson's write-ups of A Scandal in Bohemia, Case of Identity, The Man with the Twisted Lip, and The Noble Bachelor. And he criticizes Watson for focusing on the trivial rather than on logic in his writing. Pshaw, my dear fellow, what do the public, the great unobservant public, who could hardly tell a weaver by his tooth or a compositor by his left thumb, care about the finer shades of analysis and deduction? That's directly out of the Copper Beeches.
Yeah, well, so this is sort of where we are, with figuring out the, where this particular case happened. And, we've got, sort of other references here, about what's going on, in which our author delves into the dating of the Copper Beeches. And he's sort of, because, we're looking at conflicts here between these events. And so the early spring of 1890, he says, is the most likely date of Copper Beeches. Well, that's sort of flies in the face, friends, of other chronologies, which tend to put Copper Beeches in April of 1889. But anyway, that's just a footnote from me. And then we talk a little bit about Watson's marriage to Mary Morstan, and when that was published and when that happened, and, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But Watson is here at Baker Street reading the morning paper and lounging lazily in his chair. And he mentions everybody was out of town. So Mrs. Watson must have been away from London, so Watson went to stay with Holmes. And he's reading the morning paper, so it suggests he had been overnight at 221B. And thus, we have this case occurring after Copper Beeches, but before the Great Hiatus, which must be in 1890, and in the summer when cricket season occurs. And, we find out, if we consult cricketarchive.co.uk, that Surrey played Kent in the Kennington Oval on August 28th and 29 of 1890. And the match was scheduled for 3 days, but was completed in 2, with Kent defeating Surrey, who otherwise had a very good run during the 1890 county championships, winning 9 out of 14 matches and being the official champions that year. So it's understandable why Holmes would see that Surrey, who had been doing very well, would want to keep an eye on whether or not they would hold their own against Kent. And that suggests to our author that Surrey and Kent have already been playing each other at the time Holmes makes this remark, as this would be the morning after the game When the scheduled third game would have occurred, it must have been on the 30th. And therefore, our author suggests that this particular case occurred on August 30 of 1890. With Holmes's remark from Copper Beeches still on his mind and the ache from Matthew's fist still in his mouth.
And as we promised, we are going to do a drawing for a free back issue of the Baker Street Journal. This is a feature that is available to anyone who is a paid supporter of Trifles on Substack or on Patreon. So if you'd like to take part in this little feature, then please join us for as little as $1 a month. So let's bring out the prize wheel and give it a big spin. And it goes around, slowing down, landing on number 15. And that belongs to Jeff Barker. Jeff, congratulations to you. We'll be sending you a Baker Street Journal in the mail. And here we have, the creativity of the Sherlockian mind that takes these clues and weaves them together and creates order out of chaos. Or if you don't agree with some of the facts, perhaps it just creates more chaos in your mind.
Chaos. After all, it's a very welcome trifle.
It is, of course, a trifle, but there is nothing so important as trifles.
Please join us again next week for another installment of Trifles. Show notes are available on SherlockHolmesPodcast.com. Please subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts and be sure to check out our longer show, I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, where we interview notable Sherlockians and share news of the Sherlockian world.
You've taken my breath away, Mr. Holmes.
Goodbye, little man. You have made a strange start in life.